There is something fundamentally broken with the honey on your kitchen counter. For thousands of years, honey was humanity's medicine chest. It preserved the dead in ancient Egypt, healed battle wounds for Roman legions, and sustained entire civilizations through famines and plagues. But today, that same word honey describes little more than industrial sugar syrup with a marketing budget. In 1896, archaeologists cracked open sealed clay pots in an Egyptian tomb near Saqqara. Inside those vessels, they found honey that had been sitting undisturbed for over 3,000 years. It was still perfectly preserved, still edible, still containing all the enzymes and antimicrobial compounds that made it a frontline medicine. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri show honey was used in over half of all remedies for infected wounds, sore throats, digestive problems, and eye infections. These weren't primitive people fumbling with folk medicine. They were master physicians who understood that raw honey with its intact propolis, bee pollen, and enzyme systems was a precision biological tool, and they thrived on it for millennia. No diabetes epidemic, no metabolic syndrome affecting 1 in 3 adults, no children developing allergies to the very substance their ancestors used to cure infections. Fast forward to today, and diabetes rates have exploded by over 400% since 1950. 1 in 11 people worldwide now has diabetes. Metabolic syndrome affects nearly 40% of American adults over 60. Meanwhile, what we call honey has been pasteurized at temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, ultrafiltered to remove all pollen, and routinely adulterated with high-fructose corn syrup and rice syrups that fool standard purity tests. Your great-grandmother kept a jar of thick, cloudy honey that crystallized in the pantry and used it to dress wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve food without refrigeration. She never worried about expiration dates because real honey doesn't expire. So what the hell changed? The answer isn't that your metabolism is broken or that ancient medicine was just superstition. The answer is that what you're buying isn't honey anymore. It's an industrialized food product designed for shelf appeal and profit margins, stripped of every compound that made it medicinal. The Egyptian pharaohs had access to a biological pharmacy that the food industry desperately wants you to forget ever existed. Before we go deeper, drop a comment and tell us. Have you ever tried using honey from your pantry to treat a cut, burn, or sore throat? Did it work, or did it just make things sticky and sweet? Let us know below, because what you're about to discover will change how you see every golden bottle on the grocery shelf. Let me walk you through what's actually sitting in that plastic squeeze bottle in your pantry right now, because I guarantee it's not what you think it is. When I started investigating the modern honey industry, I discovered a systematic dismantling of one of humanity's oldest medicines that would make any pharmaceutical executive proud. What passes for honey today has been so thoroughly industrialized that it barely resembles the substance our ancestors relied on for survival. First, let's talk about what happens to your supermarket honey before it ever reaches that shelf. Most commercial honey gets heated to temperatures between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit during processing. The industry calls this pasteurization, claiming it prevents crystallization and makes the product flow better through their machinery. What they don't advertise is that this heat destroys the very enzymes that make honey medicinal. Glucose oxidase, the enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide when honey contacts wound moisture, begins breaking down at just 120 degrees. By the time that honey hits 160 degrees, you've essentially cooked out the antimicrobial properties that kept Egyptian mummies preserved for millennia. But the temperature abuse is just the beginning. Next comes ultrafiltration, a process so aggressive it removes every trace of pollen from the honey. The industry claims this prevents crystallization and creates a more appealing, clear product. In reality, ultrafiltration serves a more sinister purpose. Pollen is honey's fingerprint. Scientists can analyze pollen grains to determine exactly where honey originated, what flowers the bees visited, and whether it's been adulterated. Remove the pollen, and you've erased the evidence. Suddenly, cheap honey from unknown sources can be laundered through multiple countries and sold as premium product with no way to verify its origin. This brings us to the elephant in the room that the honey industry desperately hopes you'll never investigate: Adulteration. Independent testing by food scientists has revealed that up to 70% of honey sold in major grocery chains has been diluted with high fructose corn syrup, rice syrup, or other industrial sweeteners. These adulterants are specifically designed to fool standard laboratory tests. They match honey's basic sugar profile while costing a fraction of the price to produce. The result is a product that legally qualifies as honey while being nutritionally and medicinally worthless. When you strip out the pollen, cook out the enzymes, and dilute with cheap syrups, what remains is functionally identical to refined sugar in how it impacts your blood glucose and insulin response. The complex carbohydrates, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and bioactive compounds that made ancient honey a superfood have been systematically eliminated. You're paying premium prices for what amounts to corn syrup with better marketing. Your body processes this industrialized honey exactly like it would process a spoonful of white sugar, complete with the blood sugar spike, insulin rush, and energy crash that follows. The honey industry has managed to take one of nature's most perfect foods and transform it into just another processed sweetener while keeping the healthy halo intact. To understand what we've lost, I need to take you back to what honey actually looked like when it was medicine, not candy. In 1922, Howard Carter broke the seal on Tutankhamun's tomb and discovered something that would revolutionize our understanding of food preservation. Sealed clay amphoras contained honey that had been sitting undisturbed for over 3,000 years. When analyzed, that honey was still perfectly edible, still contained active enzymes, and showed no signs of spoilage whatsoever. This wasn't some mystical Egyptian magic. This was the natural result of how honey behaves when it's left in its complete, unprocessed form. Ancient honey looked nothing like the crystal clear, golden liquid we see today. When Egyptian, Greek, and Roman physicians prescribed honey for infected wounds, digestive ailments, and respiratory problems, they were working with a thick, cloudy substance packed with visible particles of pollen, bits of beeswax, and dark specks of propolis. This wasn't poor quality control. This was the complete pharmaceutical package that made honey genuinely medicinal. The Ebers Papyrus from 1600 BC, one of the oldest medical texts ever discovered, lists honey as an ingredient in over 500 different remedies. Egyptian physicians weren't primitive witch doctors stumbling around with folk cures. They were sophisticated medical practitioners who understood that raw honey delivered a complex matrix of bioactive compounds that worked synergistically. When they packed honey into surgical wounds, they weren't just sweetening the injury. They were delivering sustained-release antimicrobial therapy through glucose oxidase enzymes, immune-boosting compounds from propolis, and anti-inflammatory agents from bee pollen. Traditional beekeeping methods preserved this medicinal complexity by design. Ancient beekeepers used simple clay pots, hollow logs, or woven straw skeps. When harvest time came, they didn't extract honey through heated steel machinery. They crushed the entire comb by hand, allowing gravity and time to separate the honey from the wax. This gentle process meant that propolis, the antimicrobial resin that bees collect from tree buds and use to seal their hives, remained mixed throughout the honey. Bee pollen, packed with amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, stayed suspended in the final product. The natural enzymes that bees add during honey production remained completely intact. The result was a substance that modern food scientists would classify as a functional medicine rather than a simple sweetener. When Hippocrates wrote that honey cleans sores and ulcers, softens hard ulcers of lips, heals carbuncles and running sores, he was describing the clinical effects of a complete biological system, not isolated sugar molecules. This traditional honey had a pH between 3.2 and 4.5, creating an acidic environment that prevented bacterial growth. Its low water content, typically below 18%, created osmotic pressure that literally dehydrated harmful microorganisms. But the real magic happened when this honey contacted moisture from wounds or saliva. The glucose oxidase enzymes would activate, slowly releasing hydrogen peroxide at levels toxic to bacteria but harmless to human tissue. Ancient honey wasn't accidentally medicinal. Every aspect of traditional harvesting and handling preserved the sophisticated chemistry that made it a precision biological tool. Here's where the story becomes genuinely shocking, because modern science has done something the ancient world never could. It has proven, with rigorous laboratory testing, that those old stories about honey being medicine weren't folklore or superstition. They were clinical observations of biological fact. When researchers at Cardiff University tested Manuka honey against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, one of the most dangerous antibiotic-resistant bacteria in modern hospitals, the honey killed it completely. Not just inhibited its growth, killed it dead, at concentrations of just 25% honey mixed with sterile water. But here's what made me realize we've been systematically lied to about traditional medicine. When these same researchers tested regular supermarket honey, the kind sitting in your pantry right now, against the same deadly bacteria, it did almost nothing. The MRSA continued growing, multiplying, thriving. The only difference was that one honey came from bees allowed to forage on wild Manuka plants in New Zealand, processed with minimal heat and no filtration, while the other had been industrially pasteurized, ultra-filtered, and likely adulterated with corn syrup. Same species of bee, same basic biological process, completely opposite medical outcomes. This pattern appears in study after study across different universities and research institutions. Raw honey with intact enzymes consistently demonstrates broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity against bacteria, fungi, and even some viruses. The glucose oxidase enzyme system produces hydrogen peroxide at levels that kill pathogens without damaging human tissue. Propolis compounds show antiviral effects against influenza, herpes, and respiratory infections. Bee pollen contains amino acid profiles comparable to meat protein, plus vitamins and minerals, informs that human bodies can actually absorb and utilize. A systematic review published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences examined honey's effects on wound healing across 43 clinical trials involving over 3,000 patients. Honey-treated wounds showed faster healing times, reduced infection rates, and better tissue regeneration compared to conventional antibiotic treatments. But the critical detail buried in the methodology sections. Every successful study used raw, unprocessed honey with measurable enzyme activity and intact bioactive compounds. The few studies that used heated or processed honey showed minimal benefits, barely better than sugar water controls. The antimicrobial mechanism is elegantly simple. Raw honey's low pH, high sugar concentration, and hydrogen peroxide production create what microbiologists call a triple threat that bacteria simply cannot overcome. Add in the anti-inflammatory compounds from propolis, and you have a complete therapeutic system that addresses both infection and healing simultaneously. When ancient physicians saw wounds heal faster under honey dressings, they were witnessing precision biochemistry, not magic. But perhaps the most damning evidence comes from metabolic research comparing raw honey to processed sweeteners. When volunteers consumed raw honey, their blood sugar rose more gradually and returned to baseline faster than with equivalent amounts of refined sugar or high-fructose corn syrup. The intact enzymes and complex carbohydrates in real honey actually help regulate glucose metabolism, rather than overwhelming it. Your ancestors weren't just using honey as medicine. They were using it as functional food that supported rather than damaged their metabolic health. Now that you understand honey's true medical potential, you need to know exactly when and how this knowledge was deliberately buried. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a systematic dismantling of traditional medicine that began in the late 1800s and accelerated through the 20th century as corporations realized they could turn a sacred substance into a commodity product with massive profit margins. The first blow came with industrialization itself. In 1850, most honey came from small-scale beekeepers who harvested by crushing comb and straining through cloth. Each region had its own floral signatures, its own traditional uses, its own trusted local suppliers. But as railroads connected distant markets and steamships enabled international trade, honey became a commodity measured in barrels and boxcars rather than hand-filled jars. The push for standardization meant regional varieties with unique medicinal properties were blended into generic products that looked identical but lost their therapeutic potency. The real destruction accelerated after World War II with the rise of industrial agriculture and food processing. In 1947, commercial honey producers began adopting pasteurization techniques borrowed from the dairy industry. The official justification was preventing crystallization and ensuring longer shelf life. The hidden agenda was creating a product that could sit in warehouses and shipping containers for months without changing appearance. But heating honey above 120 degrees Fahrenheit destroys glucose oxidase, the very enzyme that produces the antimicrobial hydrogen peroxide that made ancient honey medicinal. Corporate executives knew this. They made the calculation that maintaining appearance was worth sacrificing therapeutic value because consumers couldn't see the difference. The 1970s brought ultrafiltration, ostensibly to create crystal clear honey that tested better with focus groups. In reality, ultrafiltration removes all pollen grains, making it impossible to verify origin through melissopollenology. This opened the floodgates for honey laundering operations, where cheap, adulterated honey from questionable sources could be processed through multiple countries and sold as premium product. Independent testing by the Food Safety News in 2011 found that 76% of honey sold in major grocery chains had been ultrafiltered to remove all pollen. Without pollen, there's no way to prove whether honey is genuine, whether it's been diluted with corn syrup, or where it actually originated. But the most insidious development was the systematic adulteration with industrial syrups designed to fool standard purity tests. Chinese producers, facing import restrictions and quality concerns, developed rice syrups and corn syrups that matched honey's basic sugar profile while costing a fraction of the price. These adulterants are specifically engineered to pass laboratory tests for moisture content and sugar composition while being nutritionally and medicinally worthless. The result is products that legally qualify as honey while being up to 50% industrial sweetener. Regulatory agencies became complicit by defining honey primarily through sugar content rather than enzyme activity or bioactive compounds. Current FDA standards don't require honey to contain pollen, don't measure enzyme levels, and don't test for propolis or other therapeutic compounds. A product can meet legal honey standards while being completely stripped of everything that made traditional honey medicinal. This regulatory framework protects the label while abandoning the consumer, allowing corporations to hollow out an ancient medicine while maintaining the marketing mystique of wholesome, natural honey. The hidden costs of this honey betrayal extend far beyond what you're paying at the checkout counter. When you calculate the real financial and health impact of trading medicine for marketing, the numbers become staggering. Let me show you exactly what this corporate deception has cost your household, your health, and your resilience as a self-sufficient human being. First, consider the direct financial theft. Premium raw honey from local beekeepers typically costs between $12 and $20 per pound. Supermarket honey averages $3 to $6 per pound. On the surface, industrial honey looks like the bargain, but when that cheaper honey is 50% corn syrup and completely stripped of medicinal compounds, you're paying sugar prices for what should be pharmaceutical-grade medicine. You think you're saving money, but you're actually paying a premium for fake health benefits while losing access to genuine therapeutic value. The metabolic cost hits even harder for anyone over 50 dealing with blood sugar management. Real honey with intact enzymes and complex carbohydrates produces a gentler glucose response than refined sugar. But processed honey behaves metabolically identical to high-fructose corn syrup, spiking blood sugar and insulin just as aggressively as candy. For the millions of Americans managing prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, switching from sugar to fake honey provides zero benefit while costing significantly more. You're paying extra money to damage your metabolism at the same rate. The lost household medicine capability represents perhaps the greatest hidden cost. Traditional families kept raw honey as a multi-purpose tool that served as food preservative, wound treatment, cough suppressant, digestive aid, and energy source. One jar of real honey could replace multiple pharmaceutical products while lasting indefinitely without refrigeration. When you lose access to genuine honey, you lose a piece of household resilience that kept families independent and healthy for thousands of years. Every minor cut that needs antibiotic ointment, every sore throat that requires cough drops, every digestive upset that sends you to the pharmacy represents dependency that didn't exist when real honey sat in every kitchen. The broader economic ripple effects devastate local food systems. Cheap imported honey, often adulterated and illegally subsidized, undercuts local beekeepers who can't compete with fake products sold at below cost. As small apiaries close down, communities lose access to real honey, local pollination services decline, and food security decreases. The hidden subsidies supporting industrial honey operations come from your tax dollars, meaning you're paying twice, once through taxes to prop up fake honey producers, and again at premium prices to find genuine honey from the few remaining local sources. Perhaps most tragically, we've lost generational knowledge of honey as medicine precisely when we need it most. Healthcare costs continue rising, antibiotic resistance threatens routine medical procedures, and supply chain disruptions reveal how fragile our pharmaceutical dependency has become. Raw honey represents decentralized, sustainable medicine that every household can store and use safely. But most people under 60 have never experienced genuine honey's therapeutic effects because they have only known industrial sugar syrup masquerading as nature's pharmacy. We traded resilience for convenience and medicine for marketing, leaving ourselves more vulnerable and dependent than any generation in human history. Here's how you reclaim honey as medicine and rebuild the household resilience that corporations systematically stripped away. The knowledge exists, the sources are available, and the methods are simpler than the food industry wants you to believe. But you need to know exactly what to look for because the marketplace is still flooded with fake products designed to fool even careful consumers. Your first line of defense is learning to recognize authentic honey through visual and tactile cues that can't be faked. Real honey crystallizes over time, forming thick, creamy textures that vary with floral sources and seasons. If your honey has been sitting liquid and unchanged for 6 months, it's been heated or adulterated. Genuine raw honey appears cloudy with visible particles of pollen, bits of beeswax, and sometimes darker specks of propolis. The clarity that looks appealing in supermarket bottles is actually evidence of ultrafiltration that stripped away medicinal compounds. Raw honey flows differently too, moving thick and viscous with what beekeepers call body, unlike the thin, syrupy consistency of processed honey mixed with corn syrup. When sourcing honey directly from beekeepers, ask specific questions that reveal their processing methods. Do you heat your honey during extraction, and if so, to what temperature? Anything above 100 degrees Fahrenheit begins damaging enzymes. Do you filter your honey, and how fine is your filtration? Coarse straining that removes large wax chunks while leaving pollen is fine. Ultrafiltration that removes all pollen is a red flag. Can I buy comb honey or chunk honey with actual pieces of comb in the jar? This guarantees you're getting the complete hive product with intact propolis and unprocessed honey. What flowers do your bees primarily forage on, and can you provide harvest dates? Vague answers suggest blended or imported honey rather than true local product. Building a household honey medicine chest requires thinking like your ancestors who valued honey's preservation qualities above its sweetness. Store raw honey in glass jars with tight-fitting lids in a cool, dark pantry. Properly stored raw honey will last decades without spoilage, making it ideal for emergency preparedness and long-term household medicine supplies. Keep at least 2 to 3 pounds per person as a baseline reserve, understanding that ancient households consumed honey daily as food and medicine combined. For practical medicinal applications, start with simple, well-documented uses that complement rather than replace professional medical care. A thin layer of raw honey under a clean bandage can accelerate healing for minor cuts, scrapes, and burns while providing antimicrobial protection. Raw honey mixed with warm water creates an effective gargle for sore throats and mouth ulcers. For digestive support, A tablespoon of raw honey 30 minutes before meals can aid digestion and provide sustained energy without blood sugar spikes. Always remember that honey is not suitable for infants under 12 months due to potential botulism spores, and people with severe allergies to bee products should exercise caution. The ultimate step toward honey independence involves connecting with local beekeepers or even considering small-scale beekeeping yourself. A single healthy hive can produce 30 to 60 pounds of surplus honey annually while providing pollination services for gardens and orchards. Local beekeeping associations offer classes, mentorship, and equipment sharing that make this ancient craft accessible to modern households. When you control your honey source from hive to jar, you guarantee access to genuine medicine that no corporate processing can destroy.